Hello, my name is Nicholas Brown, and this is my law firm's YouTube channel starting a new series about dicamba. This is the first video in a series of videos that I'm going to be doing about dicamba, and in this one in particular, we're going to be covering the history of dicamba and how we got to this point in modern agriculture with dicamba. As a bit of background about myself, I own my own law firm, Brown Law Office, and I'm also a legal researcher that's got several published articles about dicamba and other things involving herbicide drift. So I come at this issue both as a practicing attorney that has managed herbicide drift cases, as well as consulted other law firms on how they should manage their own herbicide drift cases with their clients. And I started doing this area of law in practice because I have significant legal research on the matter. In my opinion, dicamba presents one of the most major issues that American agriculture has faced in decades. Before I can post other issues about how to recover damages from dicamba drift and potential future projections of what's going to happen with dicamba tolerant crops, I wanted to make a video on the history of dicamba, the history of dicamba drift, and everything that led us to the point that we're at today in 2026. I've done a variation of this presentation in front of many different audiences, from name partners at major law firms and in front of classes at very prestigious law schools, to more informal environments where there's more farmers and other folks typically involved in more day-to-day agricultural activities. Regardless of what your background is, this presentation is tailor-made to make anybody, regardless of whether or not you're a legal researcher or a farmer, to be able to understand these issues, because this affects your food supply, your clothing supply, as well as the air you breathe when you're near farm. It's hard to start this presentation without talking about the piece of legislation that oversees pesticide registration, which is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, known as FIFRA. Like many pieces of agricultural legislation, it's changed names over the years, but when I refer to FIFRA, I'm referring to what Congress passed in the early 1970s. When Congress passed the current version of FIFRA in the 1970s, they put the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, in charge of overseeing pesticide regulation at the federal level. As we'll discuss in some future videos, state governments play a role in this too, but for the most part, EPA is responsible for pesticide regulation across the U.S. Pesticides registration is an incredibly important step. In order for a pesticide to be sold to American farmers, it has to be registered under FIFRA by the EPA. And in order for the EPA to register it, it has to pass a test. And that test is commonly referred to as the unreasonable adverse effects test. And what the unreasonable adverse effects test does is it weighs three types of factors. And the first type of those factors is the economic factors. In other words, how much economic benefit does this pesticide that's being proposed for registration bring to farmers? The second type of factors being considered is environmental factors. Likely self-explanatory, environmental factors are simply how much harm does this pesticide bring into the environment surrounding farms as well as on the farms themselves. And the third type of factors is social factors. Is this pesticide safe for human consumption? Is it safe for the farmers applying it? And other aspects affecting the humans involved in the agricultural process and in the consumption process of agricultural goods. And it does become apparent at times that we're using 1970s legislation to oversee issues that have come up since then that were likely not foreseen when this legislation was passed. Fast forward around 20 or 25 years, in 1996, the first herbicide-tolerant crops were introduced. And so what an herbicide-tolerant crop is that it's a crop that's been genetically modified so that it can withstand an herbicide's application to that crop. In other words, if an herbicide was applied to a normal crop, it would kill that crop. But with an herbicide-tolerant crop, because it's been genetically modified to be tolerant to that specific herbicide, if that same specific herbicide is applied to that herbicide-tolerant crop, it won't kill it. It will have zero effect or next to zero effect on it. This becomes extremely useful to farmers who are fighting the growth of weeds during the planting season and the growing season. To oversimplify things, farmers were able to spray herbicides before the planting season to kill as many weeds in the field as they could, but once crops came up out of the ground into the fields, they were generally unable to spray herbicides because they would kill both the weeds and the crops they were trying to grow and to protect with those same herbicides. But in 1996, the first herbicide-tolerant crop came out, and that meant that there was one specific herbicide that the farmers could apply, and it wouldn't hurt their crops, but it would still kill the same weeds, even though they were growing at the same time together. That first herbicide-tolerant crop was Roundup Ready. Roundup is the commercial name for glyphosate, so at times I'll refer to glyphosate, at other times I'll refer it to Roundup, but in this context, I'm referring to the same herbicide. And herbicide-tolerant crops were revolutionary for farmers. Introduced in 1996, by 1998, just 2 years later, over 40% of U.S. cotton was planted using Roundup Ready seed. By 2006, almost 90% of U.S. soybean production was Roundup Ready, and cotton figures were around the same. Now, one of the side effects of using Roundup Ready crops is that farmers were able to apply virtually as much Roundup or as much glyphosate as they wanted to on their field. But from the context of farmers, it was more beneficial to spray glyphosate more often than they previously had, because that would be killing the weeds and increasing the productivity of the crops in the field, thereby improving their harvest numbers and thus improving the farm's profitability. The unintended consequence of these many repeated applications of Roundup is that over time we started to have the development of weeds in the field that were resistant to Roundup, which are often called superweeds. Now, superweeds are nothing new. It has always been understood that a weed, when exposed to a certain amount of herbicide, will eventually develop a tolerance to it, and the weeds that do develop that tolerance to it will continue to grow much like the crops that are growing, because all of the other weeds are being killed, so the weeds that are resistant to it can continue growing without being hindered by the weeds that are not tolerant to that herbicide. So much like Roundup Ready crops are doing so well because there's less weeds, the weeds that are remaining are developing a resistance to Roundup and growing uninhibited much like the crops are. So the pesticide companies recognize this and realize that they need a new solution. And so in 2009, Monsanto and BASF start doing joint research together. The goal of this joint research was to produce a new herbicide-tolerant crop system. So they need a new herbicide other than Roundup that can kill these Roundup-resistant weeds. And they also need seeds that are tolerant to this new herbicide, whatever they choose. And the herbicide that they end up choosing is dicamba. Now, dicamba was not a new herbicide. Dicamba has been around since the 1950s as a pre-emergent. Now, it's important here to talk about two different kinds of herbicides: pre-emergent herbicides and post-emergent herbicides. As a side note, post-emergent herbicides are often called over-the-top herbicides or OTT herbicides. But to keep things simple, I'm just going to refer to things as pre-emergent and post-emergent. So pre-emergent herbicides are the first type of herbicide I want to talk about. Pre-emergent herbicides are applied before farmers start to have things growing in their field so that they can kill all the weeds and start out with a blank slate every season. Post-emergent herbicides are applied after crops start growing in the field. And so Roundup Ready crops using post-emergent versions of Roundup were able to use Roundup after the crop started growing, because that Roundup wouldn't kill Roundup Ready crop. Dicamba from the 1950s all the way to relatively modern day was used as a pre-emergent. Now, if you look at the planting calendar, you know that burn downs occur before planting season, and so typically in the winter months, January, February, in times where it's typically cold outside, which plays an important factor in this. There was already published research at the time stating that dicamba, even its pre-emergent applications, was volatile. Now, in this context, volatility means that dicamba is prone to vapor drift. Vapor drift is a type of pesticide drift that means when dicamba hits the target crop, if certain atmospheric conditions are present, typically being hot outside, then that dicamba will volatilize, or to put it simply, evaporate into the air, go up into the atmosphere, and then drift over another field, condense down, and fall sort of like a mist or a fog onto another field. But again, with dicamba being a pre-emergent, it was typically applied in colder months where the volatility conditions weren't really present. And even if they were, not a lot of farmers nearby had other crops in their field, so the effects weren't really there from dicamba being a volatile herbicide. Dicamba was unlikely to drift in the winter months, and even if it did, it likely drifted onto a field where nothing was even planted. And so from 2009 to 2015, there's this joint research project between Monsanto and BASF to have dicamba-tolerant crops replace Roundup Ready crops. At this stage, it's important to note that pesticides are regulated by the EPA, but seeds are regulated by the USDA. And so there's two different approval processes that Monsanto and BASF are having to receive at this point. Well, in 2015, the USDA approves dicamba-tolerant seeds to be sold onto the marketplace. At this stage, there's no post-emergent dicamba versions that are available. In other words, if you apply pre-emergent dicamba to these newly approved dicamba-tolerant seeds, you're breaking federal law because you're not adhering to FIFRA. But the selling point of these new dicamba-tolerant seeds was gene stacking. Gene stacking simply means that the seeds have been genetically modified to be tolerant to both dicamba and Roundup. And so the stated pitch of these dicamba-tolerant seeds was, hey, you can buy these now. These have our latest technology. They're tolerant to both dicamba, which you can't use yet, but they're also tolerant to Roundup, which you can use. And by the way, we're working on post-emergent versions of dicamba. We'll have that available in future years. And so in 2015 and 2016, there's dicamba-tolerant seeds available to American farmers, but there's no post-emergent versions of dicamba. Suspiciously, there are many allegations and many court cases involving dicamba drift during 2015 and during 2016 growing season. The implication of these pesticide drift lawsuits implies that farmers were using pre-emergent versions of dicamba and spraying that pre-emergent dicamba onto their dicamba-tolerant seeds during the growing season. Yes, this is in violation of federal law, and there's some questions as to how they knew that it wouldn't kill their crops in the field because those weren't approved herbicides to be spraying onto their dicamba-tolerant seeds. But it occurred in 2015 and 2016, and for the most part, most commentators on the topic thought that dicamba, once it's approved in its post-emergent forms, would resolve the issue, and that would just be a minor blip on the radar. Meaning that once post-emergent dicamba was approved, then drift would no longer be an issue because post-emergent dicamba surely wouldn't get approved if it was still prone to drifting like its pre-emergent counterpart. Well, in 2017, post-emergent versions of dicamba were approved, and for the most part, we all assumed that the drama was over, dicamba drift would go down, because these versions of dicamba were proven to not be volatile, meaning they wouldn't drift. It turned out to not be the case. In 2017, around 3.6 million acres of just soybeans were reportedly damaged by dicamba drift. These numbers were compiled by data reports from various state agricultural agencies across the Southeast and the Midwest. The reporting mechanisms are a little bit different, but from my independent research, those reports were typically confirmed at about a 90% rate. And again, that's just soybeans being damaged. Dicamba drift doesn't discriminate though. It also affected orchards, vineyards, other row crops, even things like golf courses and residential yards. It was an unprecedented amount of herbicide drift, and lawsuits went flying. People sued the EPA, people sued the pesticide companies, people sued the farmers who were applying the herbicide. Millions of dollars were lost because of this herbicide drift. And the same issues repeated themselves in 2018, 2019, and 2020. Yes, the state agricultural agencies tried to fix the issue independently by making different rules for applications of dicamba within their own state. But for the most part, there was no proven way to minimize dicamba drift through those state-specific labels. An interesting phenomenon occurs at this point that I'll make a separate video on is defensive planting. So we started to see this trend of defensive planting. And what defensive planting is, we started seeing a lot of people planting dicamba-tolerant seeds but not spraying dicamba. For example, certain states would have 40% of farmers using dicamba-tolerant seeds, but only 20% of farmers spraying dicamba. And that difference, that 20% who was using dicamba-tolerant seeds but not spraying dicamba, the reasoning is they didn't want to have dicamba drift affect their farms, but they didn't trust dicamba to not drift if they themselves applied it. There were even lawsuits alleging that pesticide companies intentionally tried to manufacture dicamba drift to increase sales of the dicamba-tolerant seed. And in 2020, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals vacates all 3 post-emergent versions of dicamba, meaning they're no longer allowed to be sold on the market. Within just a few months, the EPA reapproves a different version of post-emergent dicamba so that it could be applied in the following planting season. The EPA claimed that these new dicamba labels prevented dicamba drift from occurring. But still in 2021, 2022, and 2023, more dicamba drift occurs. And in a video I'll make later, state ag agencies were actually limited by the EPA as to how much they could regulate dicamba use at this point. And in 2024, a district court in Arizona vacated again all 3 post-emergent versions of dicamba, meaning no post-emergent version of dicamba was available on the U.S. market. In response, the EPA issued what's called an existing stocks order. And what that order did was told farmers, you can't buy any more post-emergent dicamba, but you can spray what you have for this upcoming season in 2024. But importantly, for 2025 and beyond, unless there's a new version of post-emergent dicamba that's approved, farmers can't use their old stocks and they can't buy any more post-emergent dicamba. For reasons that I'll get into in another video, the EPA wasn't allowed to just reapprove a new version of dicamba like they did in 2020. And so the 2024 planting season and growing season went, farmers were allowed to use dicamba if they had it, but then 2025 came around and the EPA still hadn't approved a new version of post-emergent dicamba. And bear in mind, the weed's resistance to Roundup is only getting worse at this point. So farmers still using those same dicamba-tolerant seeds because the USDA hadn't yanked those off the market. And so farmers only had a few options left as to what to spray on these weeds. They had Roundup, which is continually becoming less effective due to super weeds, and then other herbicides like Liberty, which we'll touch on in other videos as to why it's not the most popular option. But in 2025, farmers did not have a post-emergent version of dicamba. In late 2025, there was a proposed registration of new versions of post-emergent dicamba. Importantly, these new registrations that are being proposed state that there's a temperature cutoff, meaning that when it's hot enough outside, when it reaches a certain temperature, you're not allowed to spray that dicamba. But those registrations are still being reviewed, and it's uncertain whether or not they'll be approved for the 2026 planting season. What is certain is the same people who sued the EPA to get dicamba removed off the market in 2020 and in 2024 are going to sue again if dicamba gets approved for post-emergent applications for the third time. And with the decreasing effectiveness of Roundup, it leaves farmers in a very fickle position. Many farmers want dicamba to be reapproved so that they can spray it and kill weeds that are ravaging their crops. But other farmers, especially those who don't even have dicamba-tolerant options, are worried that it'll get approved and more dicamba in the air will continue to kill their crops through drift. It's a major issue for American farmers, and I'm going to be covering this issue as well as the issues that have come from it, such as what lawsuits entail, who farmers can sue, who they're not allowed to sue, and why some of it's state dependent, whether or not the EPA can really regulate state regulation of pesticides like they've been doing in the past few years, as well as other topics that are only going to continue to arise with something that is this divisive in American agriculture. So stay tuned, watch the rest of the videos on this topic, and please subscribe because there's only going to be more updates to this issue that affect not just American farmers, but the American food supply, the American clothing supply, and anything that really touches agriculture or even is in the air around American farmers.